When Eleanor Price received the letter, it was yellowed with age. The ink faded and slightly smeared as if written with a trembling hand. There was no return address, only her name in an ornate calligraphy she didn't recognize. Inside, the message was short. "Come to Bramble Hill. It is time." She'd never heard of the place, yet the name stirred something in her, a memory half-formed and tinged with unease. The envelope also held a brass key, heavy and cold, carved with a pattern of roses and thorns. The key unnerved her, though she couldn't explain why. That evening, she searched online and found a town called Graybridge in upstate New York. Bramble Hill was listed on an old property map from 1897, its location marked by a crumbling estate hidden deep in the forest. Eleanor had no living relatives she knew of. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 12, and she'd grown up in foster care. The possibility that the house was hers stirred a cautious curiosity. Something about the letter compelled her, not fear exactly, but a strange, quiet insistence, as if her presence was not just requested, but required. She packed a small bag, took time off work, and boarded a bus to Graybridge. The town was small and sleepy, its streets lined with shuttered shops and signs for antique stores and ghost tours. The locals eyed her with something between suspicion and pity when she asked about Bramble Hill. One elderly man muttered, "That place ain't meant for the living." The next morning, she began the hike into the forest with only a paper map and the brass key. The trees thickened the farther she went, sunlight dimming under their gnarled branches. Hours passed. Then, she saw it. Through a veil of vines and mist, the house emerged like a memory, looming and forgotten. It was waiting. The house stood 3 stories tall, wrapped in ivy, its windows dark and blind. The front porch sagged under its own weight, wooden columns cracked like bones. Crows nested in the chimneys, cawing once before taking off into the thick, gray sky. Eleanor hesitated at the front steps, the brass key a warm weight in her coat pocket. She took a breath and inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, the sound unnervingly loud in the silent forest. The door creaked open, revealing a grand entry hall lined with dust-draped furniture and cracked oil paintings. The air smelled of old wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, or rust. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet as she stepped inside. A grand staircase curled upward like a spine, banisters carved with roses, some missing their petals. The portraits on the wall watched her. She knew it was a trick of the light, yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. She wandered through the house, each room untouched for decades. The parlor was filled with rotting books and shattered glass. The dining room table was still set, plates cracked, silverware tarnished. In the kitchen, an ancient fridge hummed, though the house had no electricity. She opened it, empty, except for a note scrawled on yellowing paper, "Feed the house." Upstairs, the bedrooms were locked, except one. Inside was a child's room, pink and gold wallpaper peeling in strips. A porcelain doll sat on the bed, its eyes wide, one cracked. On the nightstand sat a photograph. Eleanor, as a child, standing in front of Bramble Hill with 2 adults she didn't recognize. Behind them, a shadow in the window. Eleanor stared at the photograph, her breath caught in her throat. She had no memory of ever being in this house, and yet there she was, 6, maybe 7 years old, clutching a doll that looked exactly like the one on the bed. The adults beside her were smiling stiffly. Behind them, the house looked alive. She flipped the photo over. Written in faded pencil was a name, Catherine, her mother's name. A memory tried to surface. Something about a storm, a woman singing in the dark, but it slipped away as quickly as it came. Her fingers trembled as she set the photo back down. Suddenly, the doll tipped forward with a soft thud. Eleanor jumped. The bed creaked. The air thickened. Something unseen shifted in the shadows. She backed out of the room and closed the door gently, the handle cool and slick in her hand. Back in the hallway, she noticed the wallpaper was peeling in a new spot. Beneath it was writing, scratched into the wall with something sharp. "They never left. Heart pounding, she fled downstairs. The house was cold now, colder than before. The kind of cold that wasn't just a lack of heat, but something that clung to your skin, your thoughts, your bones. Something alive. Eleanor tried to leave. She made it to the front door before realizing it wouldn't open. No matter how hard she pulled, twisted, kicked, it wouldn't budge. The key wouldn't fit anymore. The forest outside had darkened. Trees pressed close against the windows. She paced the ground floor, searching for another exit. In the hallway behind the kitchen, she found a door she hadn't noticed before. It was smaller, arched, and made of iron-bound wood. The brass key fit perfectly. The hinges groaned as it opened. A stone staircase spiraled downward, vanishing into the darkness. A smell rose up to greet her, mold, earth, and something worse, something rotting. Each step downward made the air heavier. Her phone's flashlight barely pierced the gloom. She found herself in a basement lined with jars. Hundreds of them, stacked in dusty shelves. Inside, floating in murky liquid, were things. Teeth, fingers, eyes. At the far end was an altar of black stone. On it lay another note. The house remembers. The house feeds. You are the bloodline. Eleanor locked herself in the study that night. She found old journals in the drawers, brittle and water-damaged. They belonged to her great-grandmother, Margaret Price. The entries were fragmented, descending into madness as they went on. Margaret spoke of voices in the walls, of dreams that bled into waking, of the house whispering her name. One page stood out. The house chose me, and now it chooses her. The line must continue. The house feeds or it starves. It remembers every slight. Eleanor didn't sleep. Her dreams, when they came, were vivid. A dark figure stood over her bed, mouth sewn shut, eyes dripping black. It whispered her name anyway. She woke screaming, the doll from the child's room sitting at her feet. The window was open. The forest stared in. At dawn, Eleanor climbed to the attic. The door at the top was nailed shut, but the wood was old. She pried it open with a rusted poker. The attic was filled with trunks and forgotten things. One trunk bore her mother's initials. Inside were toys, baby clothes, and a diary. Her mother had lived here briefly. Her entries hinted at escape, fear, and a deep sorrow. Eleanor must never come here, one page read. If she finds the house, it will claim her. I can't let that happen. Eleanor heard footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate. She turned. Nothing. But the floor was dusty, and new prints were there, just beside her own. She fled the attic, slamming the door behind her. The nails had disappeared. That night, the knocking began. First at the front door, then the back, then the walls, then, impossibly, from inside the mirrors. The glass shimmered. Shadows flickered just beyond the frame. Eleanor covered every mirror in the house. She stayed in the parlor, near the fireplace. But the knocking followed her, soft taps on the floor, the ceiling, the inside of her skull. At midnight, a figure appeared at the edge of the firelight. A tall man in a funeral suit, face hidden behind a veil of smoke. He held out his hand. "Time to feed," he said. Eleanor ran. The man did not follow, but the house changed. Walls twisted. Doors vanished. The house groaned as if in pain or hunger. She stumbled into a new hallway that hadn't existed before. At the end was a door made of bone. Behind it, something breathed. She opened it. A cavern stretched beneath the house, pulsing and warm. The walls were alive, slick with moisture. In the center was a pit, and within it, something vast and hungry. It saw her. It knew her. The entity spoke, not in words but in memories. Her childhood, her mother's tears, the crash that killed her parents. It had orchestrated it all, to bring her back. "The line must not die," it whispered. "You are ours." It offered her a choice. Stay and feed it, become its voice, its vessel, or run, and doom the next child in her bloodline to a worse fate. Eleanor wept. The house trembled around her, as if holding its breath. She said no. The house screamed, a sound like 1,000 voices, clawing their way into the air. Collapsed in on itself, walls folding, windows shattering. Eleanor ran through shifting halls. Fire bloomed behind her. The doll melted. The man in the veil watched silently as the ceiling caved. She burst through the front door, now unlocked, and fell into the cold forest. The house roared behind her. Then silence. She woke in a hospital bed, found by hikers. No trace of Bramble Hill. The land it stood on, listed as empty forest. The doctor gave her back the brass key. "They found this in your hand. Wouldn't let it go." She threw it into the river that night. It sank like a stone. She didn't sleep well anymore. Even far away, the house found her in dreams. Hallways opened behind her eyelids. The doll watched from corners. The man stood at the foot of her bed. Her apartment walls cracked. Pipes groaned. Voices whispered behind drywall. She moved, again and again. It followed. One night, she woke to find the brass key on her pillow. Wet. The dreams worsened. She saw the pit again. Called her name. At work, her computer typed by itself. Her co-workers forgot her name. One looked at her and screamed. Her own reflection moved independently. The house hadn't needed to trap her. It had just needed to be remembered. Memory is a door. She found a letter under her pillow, written in her own hand. It's time. The brass key was back again, damp with cold river water, its thorns now rusted and jagged. Eleanor didn't remember writing the letter. She didn't remember dreaming the night before, but somehow she remembered the house. Its heartbeat, its breath, its hunger. It had become part of her. No one in Greybridge remembered Bramble Hill now. It was scrubbed from the maps, erased from memory. But Eleanor knew where it was. The path through the forest wound itself open like a mouth yawning in welcome. She returned. The trees leaned in to greet her, branches brushing her shoulders like fingers. As she stepped into the clearing, the earth trembled softly beneath her feet. The house had grown taller, darker, its form skeletal and vast. It rose from the soil like a resurrected god, windows blinking open like eyes. It had waited long enough. Eleanor lives there now, sort of. She doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, but she's always watching. Her skin is cool and pale, her eyes hollow with memory. She doesn't move unless the house calls her. When guests arrive, drawn by curiosity or summoned by their own letters, she meets them at the door. They see her smile and they feel safe. She shows them the parlor, offers tea that's never poured, guides them through the house's impossible corridors. And when night falls, she leads them to their room, tucks them in, whispers to the walls, "Feed the house." The guests don't always scream. Some never wake. Some wander the halls forever, searching for a door that was never meant for them. Their names fade like dust. Their memories soak into the wood, into the walls, into Eleanor. Outside, the house shifts. A child walks through the forest, a letter in her hand, a brass key in her pocket. The house opens one eye. It is ready. It never forgets. They said the fire consumed everything, that nothing remained of Bramble Hill but scorched earth and the acrid scent of cinders. Locals whispered that the land was finally cleansed, that the evil which had long haunted Greybridge had been buried beneath a blanket of ash. But deep in the hollow, roots still writhed beneath the soil, and something ancient stirred in the char, feeding on the remnants of pain and memory. On the outskirts of Greybridge, 17-year-old Clara Maddox lived with her uncle in a sagging Victorian house that smelled of mildew and forgotten time. Her uncle, a retired botanist with a hollow stare and calloused hands, spoke little and drank much. Clara had grown up listening to the stories that circulated the town like fog. Tales of Bramble Hill, the cursed Price bloodline, and the woman who vanished without a trace. Eleanor Price had become the ghost story whispered between breaths. Clara never believed any of it. Not really. Not until the dreams began. They started subtly. Shadows crawling just out of reach, doorways that led to nowhere, a staircase that appeared behind her bedroom wall. But it wasn't until the whispers came, urgent, indecipherable voices that clung to her skin even after she woke. that she began to suspect something was wrong. Each night she found herself standing in a house that didn't exist, breathing air thick with dust and memory, staring at a great staircase that bled shadow like ink. One morning, Clara woke with soil under her fingernails and a name written on her bedroom window in condensation. Come home. She didn't know why. She didn't even hesitate. She packed a small bag, pulled on her boots, and started walking into the woods, toward where Bramble Hill once stood. The sky was gray and flat. The wind was silent. The birds refused to sing. The deeper she walked, the more wrong the world felt, as if something watched her from behind the bark of every tree. And there, nestled in the hollow where ashes had once smothered the land, something impossible had grown. A house, familiar and whole, stood beneath a crown of twisted branches. The house looked untouched by flame, yet no one had rebuilt it. Clara stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, her breath clouding in the stagnant air. The Victorian structure, with its steep gables and narrow windows, looked like something dredged from memory rather than reality. Ivy curled up its brickwork like veins, and a rusted wind chime spun lazily from the porch, despite the stillness of the wind. She stepped forward, each crunch of soil beneath her boots sounding too loud. Her fingers brushed the railing of the porch. The wood was warm, not from sunlight. It hadn't broken through the clouds all morning, but as though something alive pulsed inside the timber. She pressed her hand flat against the door. It opened before she knocked. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp roses and something older, decay wrapped in sweetness. A long hallway stretched forward, lined with portraits cloaked in dust and shadow. Her boots sank slightly into the faded carpet, the wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. The only sound was the creak of the floorboards beneath her and the distant, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock. She should have turned around. She should have left and never looked back. But her feet carried her deeper inside, toward the staircase. It was exactly as in her dreams. Tall and crooked, the banister slick with something dark and sticky. Her fingers trembled as they hovered above it, but she didn't touch. A whisper slithered down the hall. Clara spun, heart stuttering in her chest. Hello! Her voice sounded swallowed, as if the house drank it in. The whisper came again, closer this time, threading through the air like smoke. Welcome home. Behind her, a door slammed shut. Clara rushed back to the foyer, but the door wouldn't budge. It groaned under her weight but remained firmly closed, as if the house had made its decision. She backed away slowly, breath shallow. That's when she saw it, a figure at the top of the stairs. A woman. She wore a tattered nightgown the color of old bone. Her long hair draped like a curtain, her face obscured. She didn't move, but Clara felt the weight of her gaze. Then the woman raised her hand and pointed, not at Clara, but toward the second-floor hallway behind her. Clara blinked. The woman was gone. Terror clawed at her throat, but curiosity burned just as fiercely. She climbed the stairs, each step a labor, as if something pushed back. At the top, the hallway was narrower than it should have been, the wallpaper more intact. Doors lined the corridor, but only one stood open, a faint golden light spilling through the crack. Inside, dust blanketed everything. A vanity sat beneath an oval mirror, its surface fogged. On the dresser lay a silver locket, open. Inside was a photograph, a woman with storm-gray eyes. Clara's eyes, her stomach turned. Scrawled on the back in a careful, looping hand, Eleanor, 1913. Clara pocketed the locket and turned to the mirror. Her reflection wavered, as though underwater. Then, for a moment, it changed. The room behind her decayed further, and her reflection no longer mimicked her movements. The woman in the mirror raised her hand slowly, palm out, as if in warning. Clara staggered back. The reflection returned to normal. She left the room and explored further, finding a library filled with moldy books. One, bound in cracked green leather, lay open on a reading table. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, botanical drawings, Latin names, and journal entries. The author, Elijah Price. Her breath caught, the same last name as Eleanor. Her fingers traced the ink. The roots speak. I have heard them. They remember her. They remember everything. Clara slammed the book shut. The whisper came again, this time behind her ear. He knew Clara. He planted more than flowers. Behind the house, through a sagging glass door, was a greenhouse. Vines twisted through broken panes, and strange, blooming flowers pulsed with unnatural color. Some like bruises, others like flesh. The air shimmered with humidity and rot. She stepped inside. Each plant seemed to turn toward her. A vine brushed her ankle, then recoiled. Something buried itself in the soil beneath her feet. She could hear them, whispers without mouths, root-deep murmurs of pain and remembrance. In the far corner of the greenhouse was a locked trunk. She found a rusted spade and pried it open. Inside, a journal, wrapped in oilskin. She opened it to the first page, property of Eleanor Price. And beneath that, in darker ink, blood remembers what the mind forgets. The journal read like a confession and a warning. Eleanor spoke of dreams that bled into waking life, of flowers that fed on memory, of something ancient that lived beneath Bramble Hill. She wrote of her father, Elijah, whose experiments in botany had begun to reach beyond the natural, beyond the sane. She described waking up with dirt under her fingernails. Just like Clara. Clara flipped to the final page. The ink was smeared, hurried. I tried to stop it. I thought the fire would be enough. But the roots, they survived. And now they call to me again. I am going home. Clara closed the book. She understood now. The bloodline wasn't cursed, it was rooted. She was part of something that had been buried but never died. And now it wanted her back. That night, Clara descended into the cellar. The door creaked like a wounded thing. The air grew colder with each step. Mold crawled the walls like frost. At the bottom, an old workbench, rusted tools, and jars filled with preserved roots lined the shelves. She found a locked door behind a curtain of hanging chains. She used the spade to break the lock. Beyond was a room of stone and soil. The roots grew thick here, pulsing like veins. And in the center, half buried in the dirt, was a figure. A man, skeletal, mummified by time. Clara approached. His jaw hung slack. Clutched in his hands was a seed pod, still alive, glowing faintly. She reached for it. His hand twitched. She screamed. She ran. Up the stairs. Through the house. But every door she tried led her back to the same hallway. The house twisted around her like a maze. Then the lights went out. She stood in total darkness. Footsteps echoed behind her. Slow, deliberate. She turned, but saw nothing. Then, the whisper returned, clearer this time. You're not her, but you will be. She ran again. This time a door opened, onto a bedroom she hadn't seen before. In the center was a mirror, and in it, Eleanor stared back. You opened the door, the reflection said. Now you must finish what I couldn't. Clara dreamed of fire. She stood in the greenhouse, surrounded by screaming plants. The roots tried to drag her down. Eleanor stood beside her, eyes burning. You have to burn it again, she said. But not just the house, the roots, or it will spread. Clara woke with a start. The journal lay beside her. A single sentence scrawled across the page in fresh ink. Ashes are not enough. She understood. The fire had failed because it hadn't touched the source. The roots ran deep beneath the house, beneath the town. And they were waking. Clara scavenged the house for kerosene, for matches, for anything that could burn. She doused the greenhouse, the cellar, the walls. But the roots screamed. The house groaned and shifted, walls swelling with veins of pulsing bark. She lit the match. The fire roared to life, but the house fought back. Roots burst through the floor, grabbed her legs. Shadows writhed across the ceiling. In the mirror, Eleanor mouthed something. Jump! Clara hurled herself through the window as the house ignited. The forest lit up with flame and howl. And from deep below, something ancient shrieked. Clara awoke in the ash. Her hands burned. The sky above smeared with smoke. The house was gone. This time, truly gone. Nothing remained but scorched earth and silence. But she knew better. In her pocket, the locket pulsed faintly. The roots may have burned, but the memory remained. And memory was where it had always lived. The town would whisper again. Of Clara, of fire, of the blood that would not die. And deep beneath Greybridge, something still stirred. Clara tried to leave Greybridge. She followed the road that wound out of the hollow, boots caked with ash and blood. But every turn led her back. To the woods, to the place where the house had burned. She slept in the remains of her uncle's greenhouse, surrounded by dead ferns and glass teeth. At night, the dreams returned, not just of Eleanor, but of others, women with the same eyes, generations of them, all calling out, "You can't leave the soil, Clara. You were born in it." She clawed at her arms in her sleep, desperate to shed the memory. But when she woke, she found roots growing from beneath her fingernails, thin, white tendrils that retreated as the sun rose. The fire hadn't cleansed anything. In the days that followed, something new grew where the house had stood. Pale flowers with petals like skin, trees that bled sap like oil, mushrooms the color of bone. Clara returned to the site, drawn by dreams she no longer questioned. In the center of the ruin, a hole had opened, jagged, raw, and pulsing with breath. She stared into it, heart thundering. From below came a voice, not Eleanor's, but something older, wetter. "Feed us." Clara turned to run, but something followed her home. It took the shape of her uncle that night, knocking softly at her door, speaking in a voice made of roots and static. "You were always meant to return." Greybridge changed. People stopped looking Clara in the eye. The air smelled of wet leaves, even when it hadn't rained. Children were born sick. The soil in every garden turned black and thick, crawling with worms that didn't wriggle. They stared. She went to the library in desperation, digging through town records, family trees, old soil surveys. Every path led to one name, Price, Eleanor, Elijah, and before them, a woman called Marjorie Vale. Burned for witchcraft in 1741, accused of feeding her blood to trees that never died. The Price family bought Bramble Hill 2 years later. And Clara? Her mother had never told her what side of the family she came from. Now she knew. Clara returned to the pit. She carried Eleanor's journal and a spade, same as before. The flowers parted for her now. The soil pulsed in rhythm with her heart. She climbed down into the dark. The tunnel led to a chamber, a root cathedral vast and throbbing. At its center stood a throne of twisted wood and bone. Seated atop it, Eleanor, or something that wore her face. "Why me?" Clara whispered. Eleanor smiled with too many teeth. "Because you still think it's a curse. But this," she gestured around them, "this is inheritance." Roots burst from the walls and wrapped around Clara's wrists. The throne called to her. She was down there for hours, or days. Time dissolved in the dark. She dreamed while awake, of lives not hers, memories not lived. Women whose bodies were buried to fertilize sacred ground. Children grown in hollow trees. A covenant forged in soil, pain, and blood. The Price family hadn't guarded the evil. They were the evil, custodians of a sleeping God beneath the earth, fed by memory, rooted in sorrow. And now that God wanted Clara. She broke free, burned the roots with salt and matches, and crawled screaming back into the light. But her hands no longer bled. They bloomed. Clara woke in the forest. The trees above her were wrong, too tall, too still. Their branches didn't sway. They listened. Her clothes were torn. Her hands, raw and cracked, had begun to sprout thin white filaments, living veins trailing up her wrists. She stumbled back toward town. But Greybridge was changing. Vines broke through the cracks in the sidewalks. Houses sagged under the weight of moss. And in the center of the town square, something new had grown overnight. A tree massive, pale, and pulsing. Its bark was lined with faces, open-mouthed and half-formed. Clara's face was one of them. The townspeople stood around it, silent, watching. waiting. "It remembers you," someone whispered. "It never forgot." Determined to end it, Clara returned one final time to the hollow. She brought salt, iron, and fire, but the land rejected her tools. The iron rusted in her grip, the salt melted in the bag, and the fire refused to catch. The hole was still there, wider now, beckoning. She climbed down again, deeper this time, past the roots, past the bones. At the bottom, she found it, a thing without shape, a heart made of wood and muscle. It beat in silence, surrounded by relics, bones, jewelry, hair, all offered across centuries. The sacrifices of the Price bloodline. The god below didn't speak, simply opened, a cavernous mouth in the earth itself. And in the center of that hunger, she saw herself, years from now, eyes black with soil, calling down another girl. "Burn me," Clara said to the dark. "End this." But the god smiled. Clara tried again to fight it. She chanted. She tore at her skin. She begged Eleanor, if that was even who watched her from the roots, to show her a way out. Eleanor only whispered, "You are the key, Clara, and the lock." Back in the town, people began to change. Quietly, subtly, their skin took on a waxy pallor. Their movements slowed. Their dreams turned to rot. One by one, they returned to the hollow. Clara watched as they planted themselves, laying down in the soil, letting the earth cover them. Sacrifices not forced, but chosen. This was never about one girl. It was a seed planted centuries ago. Clara wasn't fighting a curse. She was the bloom. Clara stood where the house once stood. Her body no longer felt entirely her own. The locket around her neck pulsed. The mirror in her dreams shattered. Eleanor appeared beside her. Not flesh, not ghost, something in between. "This is how it ends," Eleanor said. "And how it always begins." Clara nodded. She dug her own grave, a shallow one. The roots reached up like fingers. She lay down. The wind was silent. The birds did not sing. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Let it end with me." The roots swallowed her gently, and for a moment, just a moment, the soil was still. Then, far away, a child was born in Greybridge, a girl with storm-gray eyes, and the roots began to stir again. They buried Clara Maddox in the earth where Bramble Hill once stood, but the town of Greybridge knew better than to mark the grave. No stone, no flowers, only a thin layer of ash, slowly overtaken by creeping moss and brittle weeds. Yet the earth never truly settled. It pulsed faintly at night, as if remembering the breath it once held. And every so often, the wind would carry a voice through the trees, soft, broken, and humming an old lullaby no one taught. The new girl came in early autumn. Her name was May, and she was only 8 when her parents moved into the rebuilt cottage on the edge of the hollow. She didn't speak much, only watched the woods with wary eyes and never stepped on the bare patches of earth that ran like scars through the grass. The townsfolk welcomed the family politely, but always at a distance, speaking in hushed tones and watching the child with a kind of wary reverence. She had the same eyes, they said, the same quiet. May began to dream soon after arriving. First, of strange flowers growing from her fingertips, and then of voices beneath her floorboards whispering secrets she couldn't understand. Some nights she woke up with her feet covered in mud. Other nights, the walls of her room would bleed condensation spelling out forgotten names. Her mother insisted it was just the adjustment. Her father stopped sleeping altogether. On the 13th night, May stood in the middle of the woods in her nightgown, barefoot and pale. A crow circled above her, cawing once before vanishing into the branches. At her feet, the moss split apart with a wet, sucking sound. Something beneath the soil opened one eye. It had waited long enough. May's parents found her the next morning asleep on the porch swing, shivering and covered in dirt. She didn't remember how she got there. Only the dream of a woman in white with empty eyes who asked her, over and over, "Do you hear them?" After that night, May stopped talking entirely. She carried a notebook and drew things instead. Roots mostly, trees with mouths, sometimes a house with no door but dozens of windows, all of them watching. The townspeople grew uneasy. They tried to forget what had happened years before. The fire, the screams, the girl who disappeared into the ground. But they remembered the look in Clara's eyes. And now they saw it again, in a child who had never known her. Rumors grew like mold. Some said Clara had been reborn, others that the roots had chosen a new host. But no one dared speak the truth aloud. Bramble Hill had never really died. May wandered the woods more often, sometimes vanishing for hours. She always returned with leaves in her hair and dirt under her nails, humming that same old lullaby. Her drawings became darker. Full-page sketches of a tree with bones hanging from its branches, or of a woman's face split open like bark. Her teacher grew concerned. Her parents stopped trying to explain it. One afternoon, May brought something home. A small, withered locket, blackened by age. She said nothing as she placed it on the kitchen table and opened it. Inside were two faces, one that belonged to a girl long dead, and the other to someone yet to be born. Her mother screamed when she recognized her daughter's eyes in both. May's room grew colder by the day, even as autumn waned. Her windows iced over from the inside, and her breath fogged the air even in the middle of the afternoon. Her father tried insulating the walls, but the chill came from deeper than brick or wood. There were times when they all heard it, a faint thrum, like roots shifting through hollow spaces, and soft murmurs echoing just below the floorboards. One evening, while her parents argued downstairs, May sat perfectly still on her bed, eyes fixed on a crack forming in her ceiling. She watched it spread like a spider web until it opened, revealing soil and something moving behind it. A whisper drifted down, her own name drawn out like breath through leaves. She didn't flinch. She only smiled and whispered back, "I'm listening." From that night on, the voices grew bolder. They no longer waited for sleep. They filled the pipes, hummed through the electrical lines, scratched behind the wallpaper. Her parents began to deteriorate. Her mother wept without knowing why, hands blistered from digging in the backyard. Her father shaved his head one morning, claiming the roots were inside him, writhing behind his scalp. No one could make him stop. May remained serene. In school, she wrote stories about a family buried alive in a house that grew instead of decayed. Her teacher tried to send the pages to a psychologist, but they went missing from the mail. At night, May stood at her window and stared into the trees, waiting for something she couldn't yet name. She didn't have to wait long. The town held a harvest fair that year, though no one felt much like celebrating. The air hung too thick, the leaves turned black at the edges, and the pumpkins rotted from within before the carving knives touched them. Still, tradition was a shield, however fragile. Booths lined the green. Music played through cracked speakers. Children bobbed for apples. May walked among them, unnoticed at first, her bare feet silent in the grass. She stopped in front of the old well, the one sealed decades ago after a child fell in and was never found. No one had touched it since. May knelt beside the stone rim and pressed her hand to the moss-covered surface. The ground pulsed beneath her palm, and something deep within groaned like an ancient hinge. Without a word, she picked up a piece of chalk and began to draw symbols around the base. Spirals, crosses, strange loops like twisted roots. The mayor's wife was the first to notice. She called out, then stopped mid-sentence, mouth open. Her eyes rolled back and she collapsed in the dirt. No one could explain it. A seizure, they said. Heat stroke. But May's chalk symbols remained, impossible to wash away, no matter how hard they scrubbed. That night, the well wept dark water from the cracks. May didn't speak for days after. She only stared at the walls of her room, which had begun to flake in strange patterns, shapes that matched the ones around the well. Her drawings grew sharper. She no longer needed to look at the page as she worked. Her hands moved with purpose, as though guided by memory, or by something else entirely. And all the while, the earth outside grew restless. That winter came early and heavy. Snow blanketed Graybridge in thick, silent sheets, but it didn't bring quiet. It brought pressure, the kind that made bones ache and walls creak at night. May stopped eating, not out of protest or sickness, but because she claimed the earth was feeding her now. Her mother begged, pleaded, screamed, but May only smiled and said, "It's already inside me." Her father no longer spoke at all. The school nurse called social services after finding seed pods in May's backpack. Soft, wet things that smelled of rot. They never arrived. The road into Greybridge collapsed in the storm, they said. No one could get in or out. The town grew more insular. People whispered about what lived beneath their feet, and some remembered stories their grandparents told. Stories they'd dismissed as folklore. But the old rules had always been warnings. In the quiet of her room, May planted a row of seeds along her windowsill. They sprouted overnight, tendrils climbing the glass like veins. She spoke to them in her sleep, in a language that didn't belong to the living. At school, her classmates avoided her eyes. One boy teased her and disappeared 2 days later, last seen walking toward the hollow. His shoes were found outside the boundary line, toes pointing inward. The soil around the old well steamed even in the snow. A warmth rose from it, thick and foul, like breath. May stood outside some nights, arms open wide, face tilted toward the black sky. She didn't shiver. She didn't blink. She only listened. The voice beneath the earth had grown louder. The dreams returned in fragments. Not May's own, but echoes decades, even centuries old. She saw through other eyes. A woman burying a locket. A man pruning a tree that bled. A child being lowered into the soil with a kiss on the forehead and a promise. "You'll be beautiful when you bloom." She woke with blood in her mouth and petals in her hair. Her drawings changed. No longer just roots and faces, but blueprints, cross-sections of the town, the woods, the hollow. She marked places no one had shown her, places long sealed and forgotten. Her teacher wept quietly when she saw them. She'd grown up hearing her grandfather's stories about tunnels and offerings and the tree that grew before any house was built. She recognized every line May drew. That week, 5 dogs went missing. Birds dropped from the sky in flocks. The river turned a milky white, thick with algae. The mayor organized a town meeting, but half the chairs were empty. Those who did attend didn't speak. They just sat, staring forward, eyes glazed with something old. When the lights flickered, no one moved. May didn't attend. She sat alone at home, watching the vines twist around her ceiling fan like a noose. Her father had locked himself in the basement. Her mother had stopped sleeping altogether. May pressed her fingers to the frost-covered window and whispered to something outside. Something whispered back. One morning, the townspeople woke to find a house standing in the hollow again. No one had built it. No one had seen it appear. But there it was, identical to the one that burned years ago. Its gables clawed at the sky. Its porch sagged like a mouth about to speak. The windows were too dark, too deep. May was already standing at the gate when her parents found her. They screamed her name, but she didn't turn. Her bare feet crunched on the frostbitten grass. The trees leaned in. Her father tried to run after her, but the woods pulled him back. Branches curled around his legs like rope. His mouth opened to scream, but only dust poured out. Her mother fell to her knees and wept as May opened the door to the house and stepped inside. The interior was identical to Clara's memory. The staircase, the portraits, the mirror at the end of the hall. May walked through as though she'd lived there 1,000 lives. In the dining room, the table was already set. Plates of soil, cups filled with something red and thick. At the head of the table sat a figure in white. Eleanor, or what was left of her. May took her seat. The figure nodded. Roots grew up through the floor and coiled around her chair. The feast began. May returned from the house changed. She didn't blink anymore. Her skin was paler, her hair longer, her voice, when she did speak, carried the echo of others. She walked the streets barefoot in the snow, and people opened their doors without question. Some offered her food. Others only bowed their heads. The town had remembered how to kneel. She began choosing people. Quietly, softly, she'd touch someone's shoulder, or hand them a flower, and within days they'd vanish. No search parties. No questions. Just empty beds and windows left open. Those who remained claimed they'd always been fewer. That Graybridge was meant to be small. Easier to feed that way. The church bells rang by themselves now. The ground beneath the steeple pulsed like a heartbeat. May stood there on Sundays, eyes closed, lips moving without sound. The priest had left months ago, his robes found folded in the snow like shed skin. No one took his place. No one dared. The house in the hollow grew larger. Windows appeared where there were none. Smoke curled from the chimney, black and slow, and from the ground around it, flowers bloomed. Familiar ones, the kind that never grew in sunlit soil. The wind changed one night warmer, fouler. Something heavy settled over the town, and the crows came back in flocks. May stood beneath the dead tree outside her house, staring west. She said one word before collapsing in the snow. Clara! The grave in the hollow split open that same hour. No one saw it happen, but by morning, the earth was flat and undisturbed, as though nothing had ever been buried there. The locket May had left in her kitchen reappeared around her neck, cold to the touch, beating like a heart. Clara walked into town just before dusk. Same face, same eyes, but older now, worn thin by the earth. Her hair was dust-colored. Her feet left no prints. People stopped what they were doing. Some ran. Others fell to their knees. Clara said nothing. She simply walked, heading straight for the hollow. May met her at the edge. For the first time, she looked afraid. The confrontation wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. The two girls stood across from each other in silence, the air thick with tension and rot. Clara held the locket in one hand. May held the book she had never been taught to read but always understood. Neither blinked. The earth beneath them trembled. Trees cracked open and bled. Roots emerged, writhing, hungry. The house in the hollow groaned and shifted. It knew what was coming. It remembered, and it was afraid. Clara stepped forward. Her voice was no longer just hers, carried the weight of generations, of sacrifice, of resistance. She spoke the words Eleanor had failed to say. May's mouth opened, and a scream poured out. Not hers, but countless others, buried and bound. The town shuddered. Lights burst. Windows shattered. The air filled with ash and voices. And then silence. Clara walked into the house in the hollow, and the walls recoiled. Paint peeled in reverse, portraits blinked awake, and the staircase groaned like a dying animal. Every step she took cracked the floor, revealing roots that hissed and twisted. May followed her, silent now, the locket swinging wildly on her chest as if caught in an invisible storm. They entered the heart of the house together. The dining table was empty, the fireplace cold. The mirror at the end of the hall had splintered. Clara reached for the frame, and it melted away like wax. Beneath it was not a wall, but a tunnel. Deep, wet, breathing. Without a word, she stepped inside. May hesitated, then followed. The earth swallowed them both. Beneath Graybridge, the tunnels opened wide. Bones lined the walls, twisted with roots and rusted iron. The air smelled of milkweed and blood. At the end of the path stood the root throne. A throne built of generations, pulsing, alive. Clara approached it, hands outstretched, and for a moment, the roots hesitated. But May lunged. They grappled in the soil, not as children, but as avatars, fragments of something ancient and fracturing. The root beneath them screamed, cracking the ceiling of the tunnel and sending ash pouring through. Clara's hand closed around the locket. May's teeth bit into her shoulder. The throne behind them pulsed faster, like a rising drumbeat before collapse. Clara spoke Eleanor's name. May spoke Marjorie Vale's. Their words overlapped, twisted, bled into one another. A fracture split the floor, and through it rose the shape of a woman neither had ever seen but both had always known. The mother of the seed, the first hollow queen. Her face was bark, her mouth soil. The woman did not speak. She placed a root tendril on each girl's forehead. Both screamed, spasming, vomiting black water. The woman blinked once, then crumbled into dust. The root throne collapsed. The tunnel shook. Above them, Greybridge split open. The townspeople saw the sky open. Ash fell like snow. The river ran red. Windows glowed with unearthly light. They gathered in the square, crying or praying or simply waiting. Then the ground beneath their feet convulsed, and the house in the hollow exploded upward into flame. From the blaze came Clara alone. Smoke poured from her mouth with every breath. Her eyes were silver, her hands black with sap. She walked barefoot through the street, and every step scorched the road. May did not follow. She had become something else, something left behind. Clara returned to her childhood home and stood in the ruins of the greenhouse. There were no more vines, no more flowers, only scorched soil and a single empty pot. She knelt and placed the locket inside, closed the lid, buried it. Then she collapsed. Greybridge never recovered. Those who stayed behind spoke only in whispers. The children grew strange. The trees refused to die. The ground in the hollow healed over, but too fast, too smooth, like skin growing over an eye. No one built near it again. They left offerings instead. Candles, bones, small carvings made from ashwood. Clara never spoke again. She was found wandering days later, barefoot and burned. She was taken to a hospital miles away, where she refused food, drink, or light. She simply stared out the window, and sometimes, when no one was looking, she would smile. May was never seen again, but sometimes, when the frost rolls in early and the wind smells of old smoke, people see her shape in the trees, small, barefoot, crowned with ivy. And from the ground near where the house once stood, a white flower blooms. Only one. Years passed. The locket remained buried. But one spring, a girl named Elsie moved into town. She was 10, quiet, thoughtful. She liked drawing roots. Her mother thought it was cute. Her father didn't sleep well. The woods near the hollow had begun humming again. Elsie dreamed of a staircase, of a table, of a name she'd never heard but could spell perfectly. Clara. In her sleep, she whispered it over and over. The earth outside her window cracked. Something stirred beneath. In her backyard, she dug without knowing why. She found a box, and when she opened it, the locket beat like a heart.